All glories to Asmali Buddha, Hare Krishna. All glories to Guru and Garanga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashoda Nandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Nittai Gaura Haribol, 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 Nittai Gaura Haribol. Namo Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivarjakacharya Ashtodasha Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Syamakundar Radha Kund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Shri Shri Mayapur Navadi Dham Ki Jai Shri Shri Purushottam Chaita Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai Ganga Devi Yamuna Devi Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Syamasundar Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Madhava Ki Jai Nitai Gaur Premanande all glories to assembled devotees all glories to assembled devotees all glories to assembled devotees all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamutiret. So we are in Canto number 3, chapter number 6, text number 3. Sonu pravishto bhagavans cheshta rupena tam ganam binnam samyojayam asa suptam karma prabodhayan Sonu pravishto bhagavans cheshta rupena tam ganam भिन्नं संयोजयाम आसा सुप्तं कर्म प्रबोधयन् सोऽनुप्रविष्टो भगवान् चेष्टरूपेण तं गणम् भिन्नं संयोजयाम आशा सुप्तं कर्म प्रबोधयन् सोऽनुप्रविष्टो भगवान् चेष्टरूपेण तं गणम् भिन्नं संयोजयाम आसा सुप्तं कर्म प्रबोधयन् सोऽनुप्रविष्टो भगवान् चेष्टारूपेण तं गणम् भिन्नं संयोजयाम आसा सुप्त कर्म प्रबोधयन् सोऽनुप्रविष्टो भगवान् चेष्टारूपेण तं गणम् भिन्न संयोजयतम् आशा सुप्तं कर्म प्रबोधयन् सोऽनुप्रविष्टो भगवान् चेष्टारूपेण तं गणम् भिन्नं संयोजयाम आसा सुप्तं कर्म प्रबोधयन्. Word meanings. Saha, that. Anupravishtaha, thus entering later on. Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead. Cheshta Rupena, by his representation of attempt. Kali, them. Ganam, all living entities, including the demigods. Bhinnam, separately. Sam yojayam, asa, engaged to work. Suptam, sleeping. Karma, work. Prabodhayan, enlightening. Translation. Thus, when the personality of Godhead entered into the elements by his energy, all the living entities were enlivened into different activities, just as one is engaged in his work after awakening from sleep. Read the translation once again. Thus, when the personality of Godhead entered into the elements by his energy, all the living entities were enlivened into different activities, just as one is engaged in his work after awakening from sleep. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Every individual soul remains unconscious after the dissolution of the creation and thus enters into the Lord with his material energy. These individual living entities are conditioned souls everlastingly, but in each and every material creation, they are given a chance to liberate themselves and become free souls. They are all given a chance to take advantage of the Vedic wisdom and find out what is their relationship with the Supreme Lord and how they can be liberated and what the ultimate profit is in such liberation. By properly studying the Vedas, one becomes conscious of his position and thus takes to the transcendental devotional service of the Lord and is gradually promoted to the spiritual sky. The individual souls in the material world engage in different activities according to their past unfinished desires. After the dissolution of a particular body, the individual soul forgets everything, but the all-merciful Lord, who is situated in everyone's heart as a witness, the supersoul, awakens him and reminds him of his past desires, and thus he begins to act accordingly in his next life. This unseen guidance is described as fate, and a sensible man can understand that this continues his material bondage in the three modes of nature. The unconscious sleeping stage of the living entity, just after the partial or total dissolution of the creation, is wrongly accepted as a final stage of life by some less intelligent philosophers. After the dissolution of the partial material body, a living entity remains unconscious for only a few months, and after the total dissolution of the material creation, he remains unconscious for many millions of years. But when the creation is again revived, he is awakened to his work by the Lord. The living entity is eternal, and the wakeful state of his consciousness, manifested by activities, is his natural condition of life. He cannot stop acting while awake, and thus he acts according to his diverse desires. When his desires are trained in the transcendental service of the Lord, his life becomes perfect, and he is promoted to the spiritual sky to enjoy eternal awakened life. Om Jnanatimrandasya Jnananjana Shalakya Chakshurunmritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So, in the third canto, we started off with Vidura going on a pilgrimage after being insulted by his family members. And as he is traveling through various holy places, he meets upon Uddhava. And Uddhava had just received transcendental knowledge from the Supreme Lord Krishna. And in the vicinity of that exchange was also sage Maitreya. So Maitreya had heard the instructions by the Supreme Lord to Uddhava. And so as Vidura meets Uddhava, Uddhava directs Vidura to take guidance and shelter of Maitreya Muni. And so Vidura is, travels towards the Ganges to find Maitreya Muni. And Maitreya Muni and Vidura, we just saw in the last chapter, chapter 5, they're having this exchange about creation. And in the last chapter, chapter number 5, we also saw that the Devatas are offering prayers to the Supreme Lord. So this is really where we have ended. So in terms of the organization of this chapter, we have the first 10 verses which are talking about the Virat Rupa. And then we have the next 16 verses which are talking about manifestation of the different demigods. And then from chapter number 27 to 34, we will see that there is description about the development of plants, varnas, and various kinds of living entities. And finally, in the last 6 chapters, we will hear from Maitreya Muni talking about his inability to describe the description that he just made in the last couple of texts. So that is the overall organization. So we are into the text number 3 and just entering into that description of the Virat Rupa. Now, this description of Virat Rupa happens every time somebody asks about creation. And in general, yeah, any intelligent soul who takes a pause in their life wants to understand about creation. What is all of this about? And what is my purpose? Atato Brahma Jigyasa. And so, very learned, intelligent sages and devotees ask equally learned and intelligent devotees about, please talk about creation. And every time there is question about creation, we also see that there is description about the Virat Rupa. So there was one description of the Virat Rupa in the first canto, and that is chapter number 3. And then the second time the Virat Rupa is talked about is in the second canto, first chapter, verses 24 to 39, where Sukadeva Goswami is describing to Parikshit Maharaj. And then third time Virat Rupa description happens is in the fifth chapter of second canto. And this time Brahma is talking to Narada Muni. And this description between Lord Brahma and Narada Muni is most elaborate in terms of its description. And then the fourth time Virat Rupa is described is again in the second canto, and this time in the 10th chapter, Sukadeva Goswami speaking to Parikshit Maharaj. So we've already seen 4 descriptions of Virat Rupa in 4 different situations. And now we are again going to be entering into the Virat Rupa descriptions in this third canto, chapter number 6. And again, we will see another description of Virat Rupa coming up, and this is a conversation between Kapila Dev and his mother Dehuti. And then finally, again, we'll see a Virat Rupa description coming up in the 12th canto, that is between Sudha Goswami and the sages in Naimisharanya. So we will have a lot of opportunities to expand our understanding of Virat Rupa, or Virata Purusha. So, in this, I wanted to get to the punchline, not necessarily wait till the end. The punchline of all these descriptions that we see is that there is matter. And we understand matter as pradhan, all the ingredients that are needed for manifestation of this material world. Now, matter does not move until there is consciousness that is invested in it. And in this case, Mahavishnu glances on the pradhan, and that's how the Mahatattva is kicked into action. And then you have the elemental demigods who manifest, who then help out with the further process of creation. And that was the prayer that we saw previously in the previous chapter, where the elemental devatas, the primary devatas for the 5 Panchamahabhutas, they are praying to Lord to give them the capability and the capacity and the intelligence to help him in his service. So the punchline for all of these elaborate descriptions, as we understand from this description of Virat Rupa, the process of creation is there is matter, and there's sum total of matter and capabilities, but those get manifested only with the investment of consciousness, in this case, divine consciousness of the Supreme Lord. So that is the fundamental point that needs to be drawn from these descriptions. And then another thing to note here is that Srila Prabhupada in this particular verse spares no opportunity to understand these verses in a much more practical, application-oriented fashion. So here, Prabhupada is describing about how all of this elaborateness All this elaborate creation, at the end of the day, is being orchestrated so that the living entities can reconnect with the Supreme Lord. There are all these material facilities that have been endowed to us is not for our enjoyment, primarily, although the Supreme Lord respects the desires and the free will of the living entity and provides these facilities. However, the living entity may choose to execute his or her life. However, the ultimate goal, as we understand, is to utilize this opportunity to connect back to Krishna and go back to the spiritual world. So, in this particular purport, Srila Prabhupada, in his very last line says, when his desires are trained in transcendental service of the Lord, his life becomes perfect and he is promoted to the spiritual sky to enjoy eternal awakened life. So, if we were to analyze the situation, we have the jivas have these desires, and these desires are held in that unmanifested state along with the jivas. And as soon as the creation is manifested, and we have these bodies that have been endowed to us, the Supreme Lord, who is always with us in the heart, also reawakens some of our deepest desires. So, we start to operate in that mode of desire that we have inculcated over the past couple of lifetimes. So, in this verse, we understand that the jiva actually, just like the material energy exists and is not active until there is spiritual consciousness that is invested, similarly in our existence, there are various facilities and matter that are surrounding our living, our existence. And to the extent that we can invest our consciousness and energy, to that extent, those become active and engaged in satisfying our desires. And so another point to note here is that at the end of the day, all that a jiva can actually do is desire. That is all. Everything else is being orchestrated by these multifarious energies of the Supreme Lord. There are the senses, the sense organs, there's the mind, the intelligence, and the three modes. All of these come together in order to satisfy our desires. And this actually goes to the pastime of Damodar pastime, where Mother Yashoda is trying to bind Krishna. And every time she's trying to bind Krishna, the rope is always 2 inches too short. And Acharya has explained what those 2 inches represent. One is the desire, the intent, and the second is the descending mercy. Now, both of that need to be in place for the job to be successful. In this case, binding of Krishna. And so, similarly, even in our situations, a lot of the facilities that we have, including our intelligence, our mind, the physical resources that we have, all of that has already been endowed by the Supreme Lord. And to the degree that we can inculcate, channelize, refine, purify our desires, to that extent, we can actually fulfill the goal of our specific lives. So, So anyway, those were some of the points that came to my mind, and I wanted to open up for any questions or comments or suggestions.
Hare Krishna, I was thinking of, Vaisheshika Prabhu is saying, where attention goes, energy flows, and Guru Maharaj adds a phrase before, where intention is, attention goes, and then wherever attention is, energy flows. So towards the end, you said, purifying and refining the desires, and it starts with, seems like it starts there, and then with that intent, we follow with the action, hopefully in service of the Lord. So those are some thoughts I have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhu. I have a quick question. So, all is that we can do is desire, right? Everything else is orchestrated by the modes of material nature or everything else. But here in in Bhagavad Gita also that, in our cases also, sometimes we might not have those strong desires to do something which is not right? But we are impulsed to do it because of our past tendencies or whatever it is. Why, how do we, relate these two?
So again, this goes to, as His Holiness Romapada Swami Maharaj, that I've listened to a lot of his lectures, and the response to a lot of these how is always association. It's the easiest stepping stone to any of the how to be humble, how to be more dedicated, how to be more introspective. At the end of the day, Srila Prabhupada has created this big mansion of ISKCON, umbrella of ISKCON, to ensure that devotees have association of each other. And in the association of each other, we perfect our life. We grow in our spiritual consciousness. That's the purpose of ISKCON. That's the purpose of having a temple. That's the purpose of coming together. And that is also the way to fill in some of the gaps that we may have. Not some of the gaps, many of the gaps that we may have. So that would be my response, is the desire, the desires that we carry is the sum total of the desires that we've had in the past. So, and not just this lifetime, many lifetimes. So the force of the desire is quite strong. We should not underestimate that. But that force of the desire can be diverted in Krishna's service primarily through association, and then sadhu, guru, sadhu, and then shastra. So again, in the association of devotees, we feel inspired to take shelter of guru. We feel inspired to take shelter of shastras. And as we study the shastras, that refines our desires. Srimad Bhagavatam is like a maple syrup. Doesn't matter, even if you're like Karela, you put Karela into maple syrup, it still end up being sweet. So that is the power of these scriptures. But again, the stepping stone even into the scriptures is association of devotees, which must be very, very much cherished. Does that answer your question, Prabhu? Thank you. Any questions online? Yes, Mataji.
Before and after, too, of this verse. And also you mentioned the punchline, the essence of the verse very nicely. because when we were reading the translation and purport, I was wondering how I'm going to understand. But you said the essence very nicely to make it easy for us to understand. I have a comment and a question. The comment is, in the purport, Prabhupada mentioned that at the end of the dissolution, when there is time for recreation, the Lord has to remind the jivas to remember the desires. I was just thinking that the tininess of ourselves, we cannot even remember our desires, but we are ready to enjoy when its creation happens, right? So that was the thing. And then the question is, you mentioned where all in Bhagavatam the Virat Rupa, the creation and the Virat Rupa is mentioned. In one of the verses also, Sukadeva Goswami says that I cannot explain the creation completely, just be satisfied with whatever I'm going to tell you. So how important, because the topic of creation can be so deep and so big, and how important for us to understand the creation in relation with our devotional service to the Lord, and how we, like a application, like how it's going to help me, or how we can understand, or why it is important to understand.
Yeah, it's a great question. Actually, that helps. There was another point that I forgot to mention, and I think the question that you asked relates to the point that I forgot. So thank you so much. Somehow Krishna inspired you to ask that question, and I didn't plan that question. So what we see is that, even Vidura, as he is inquiring about all of the pastimes of the Supreme Lord, he's asking about personalities, relationships, like, the kind of topics that devotees relish is relationships and pastimes. But then he makes this turn into creation. Why? Why get into this technology conversation? Why not just stay out of the technology, be happy with relationships, and be done with it? And we see that in many such instances too, and this is also between Narada and Brahma. Narada Muni represents, the epitome of bhakti. Why would he want to get into, technology questions? And so, if looking at that, we can understand that, we are curious. As entities, living entities, we are curious. We are curious about, how we got here. Yes, there's relationships, but at the end of the day, we want to know, but how did this whole thing start, right? And so that is the inherent tendency of the spirit soul, which is to inquire, is to be curious. And so it is but natural that all of these devotees who are very elevated in their bhakti are also wanting to understand about creation. So the understanding of creation is very complex, and actually we can see from the Bhagavad Gita, the 11th chapter, where again the universal form is being described by Lord Krishna to Arjuna. And is it the 8th verse where he says that, now I give you the divine vision by which you can see the Virat Rupa. Otherwise, you can't just use your human eyes to materialize to see that vision. And so this process of seeing and understanding creation is not an ascending process. It is not a cerebral effort. Because our cerebral effort has limitations. And usually the limitations are within the realms of logic. And it cannot transcend the realms of logic. Even logic in itself can be quite complex for most people. And the process of knowledge acquisition is a descending process. And that is why we see these pure devotees, again, reaching out to and other devotees in the parampara, who have heard from somebody who has heard from somebody who has heard from the Supreme Lord. So they are seeking this knowledge in parampara, evam parampara praptam. And it is only through that process of purity of heart, purity of desire, with a mood of humble inquiry, that one actually can acquire the intelligence that is required to understand these very complex topics. And to emphasize that these are actually indeed complex topics, just so that people don't feel, this is not for me. Just want to close this canto, and then let's move on to the next canto. Just because we have enough motivation to move on, Maitreya Muni is trying to represent us in saying that, I have a little bit of understanding, but I actually don't understand this enough. And same is our case, is, we keep hearing, we keep reading, you're not this body, you're the spirit soul. We keep hearing and reading that. But it takes a couple of years and maybe even lifetimes to fully assimilate that. And the same is the case here. And Srimad Bhagavatam is presenting this process of creation from multiple perspectives with multiple personalities in multiple situations to help us form that bigger picture. But at the end of the day, this is an descending process. This is not an ascending process. It's not a cerebral process. Thank you very much. Any other questions do we have online? Srila Prabhupada ki jai.